The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
The deadliest mass shooting in American history took place over the weekend in Orlando, Florida. It was an attack at a gay nightclub committed by a 29-year-old Islamic extremist who pledged allegiance to ISIS shortly before the attack, although there is no evidence, as President Obama recently mentioned today, that he was directed specifically by any members of ISIS. This attack left 50 dead and 53 wounded at last count. The man is American-born Omar Mateen. He is now dead, killed by law enforcement. Not only is this the deadliest mass shooting in American history, it's the deadliest single incident of anti-LGBT violence in the United States history. It also appears to be the deadliest terrorist attack in the U.S. since the 9/11 attacks of 2001. The individual stormed the club armed with an AR-15 style assault rifle, as well as a handgun, very late, about 2 a.m., shot about 1/3 of the 300 patrons that were there. The initial attack was followed by a 3-hour standoff with people held hostage until about 5 a.m., which is when law enforcement agencies raided the club with armored vehicles. The shooter was killed after a gunfight broke out with police. And following the nightclub attack, Mateen's ex-wife told mass media outlets that during their marriage, Mateen was mentally unstable and would beat her. She has since given a number of interviews. He reportedly remarried and had a 3-year-old son. He became a person of interest to the FBI back in 2013 and 2014. The 2013 investigation was opened after Mateen made what are described as inflammatory comments to coworkers. And then the 2014 investigation was opened after Mateen was, quote, linked to U.S. radical Moner Mohammed Abu Salah, who became a suicide bomber in Syria. Mateen was interviewed 3 times in connection with these 2 investigations. They were both closed after they produced nothing that appeared to warrant further investigation of this particular individual. Now, U.S. Congressman Adam Schiff, the ranking Democratic member of the House Intelligence Committee, said that the Department of Homeland Security informed him that Mateen had indeed pledged allegiance to the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, known to us as ISIL. And this is horrifying, Lewis, on so many levels. Some are very quick, as we often see, to dismiss religion as a factor here, the shooter's dad included. His father said of his son's actions, this had nothing to do with religion. He was quoted as saying he had seen his son get very angry after he saw a gay couple kissing at a festival in Miami some months ago, which he suggested was the motivating factor. I truly don't get that comment, because religion wasn't the issue. It was the fact that he really didn't like gay people. But where was that belief? Where was that homophobic belief sourced from? In other words, it's his religion which was anti-gay. I don't think it was his consumption of reality TV that made him anti-gay, right? So I don't totally understand that comment.
Yeah, it sounds like he probably did have anger issues, and I'm sure there's some form of mental illness at play here. Yeah. I don't know how pronounced it is, but if you pledge allegiance to the Islamic State, I mean, it's pretty clear that religion is motivating you. Well,
there's this other issue which is increasingly coming up, which came up in our discussion of female genital mutilation, which is, well, it's not religion, it's culture. FGM may be culturally connected to the Muslim world, but it's not anything specific about the religion. Well, different religions are connected to their respective cultures to differing degrees, right? So we could take any religion and say, this religion has a strong cultural association that spans many of the individuals who follow the religion. Here's another religion where we see more of a disconnect between culture and religion. That seems to be more of a semantic disagreement to me. And by the way, the father of the Orlando shooter said earlier today that his son shouldn't have killed patrons at the gay nightclub because God would punish them. according to the Washington Post. So again, this is the same father who's saying religion didn't play any role and is saying that the shooting shouldn't have been done because God, the God of his religion, presumably, would have taken care of those gay people. There was no need for him to go and shoot it up. This is the same guy saying religion didn't play a role. It makes absolutely no sense to me.
Religion, without a doubt, played a role, and it's a plague. Religion is a plague, and I wish, there is something kind of wise about what his father is saying. I wish that all religious people believed that, because they feel they need to be warriors for God. And in that, it is implied that God can't handle these things himself.
Right. If you believe in an all-powerful God, and then why even worry about taking action on earth about people sinning or what you consider to be sinning? God is going to take care of it sooner or later. Of course, the problem is people believe they must be warriors for God, and that's sometimes where these ideas come from. Now, others are going the route of saying, well, this is all about American foreign policy and the way in which the United States oppresses Muslims around the world. I'll remind you that this particular individual was American. He's more American than me. I was born in another country, as were my parents, and I immigrated to the U.S. The shooter here was born in the United States to foreign-born parents. So he was more American than me. So to say the issue is oppression by the U.S. Foreign policy abroad doesn't really make sense. But when you look at the pictures of Mr. Mateen with the jewelry and the watches and the smartphone that have been released, he didn't really seem to be particularly oppressed by whatever it is that some people are pointing to. And that, I think, is something we need to remember. And then the third layer of this is the gun issue. And we're going to go into this a little bit later. The guns were legally purchased. I want to remind you of that. And there are some real differences between Democrats and Republicans on this issue. Democrats have attempted numerous times to prevent terror watch list Americans from purchasing guns legally. Republicans have consistently stopped that. Of course, in this particular case, these cases and investigations had been closed. So before we move on to talk about the gun issue, we do have to revisit something that I know a lot of people really don't like, Lewis. There are a lot of Christians who watch the show who don't like this. There are many Muslims who watch the show who don't like this. When you get to the extremes of most religions, the extremes really start to look the same. You have the Christian right, which is very hostile to Islam. You have an overwhelming plurality of those who support ideas like Donald Trump's Muslim ban, identifying as Christians. At the same time, you have Islamic extremists who are hostile to Christianity, but they're both hugely anti-gay. That is what wraps them together. And I've said this time and again, both Christian and Islamic extremists are hugely anti-gay, not to mention anti-woman in terms of subjugation and sexism and misogyny. They want to destroy separation of church and state. They believe their religions should inform the law of the land, Christians respectively, and Muslims with their own religions, but the concept of breaking down separation of church and state. So there are many overlaps here that are particularly notable because the groups also don't like each other.
Yeah, and you'll find these parallels comparing any number of organized religions, large organized religions. Once you hit those extremes, you're right. I mean, what's the difference, really?
I don't have the answer on how to stop this. I know a lot of people pretend to. They go on and they say the issue is just mental illness. Well, this clearly was an unstable person from what we've learned, but mental illness alone is not the problem. And others say we shouldn't talk at all about guns. And others say this is only an issue of guns. And then some will say, look at how the United States is oppressing these Muslim countries abroad. Remember, this was an American individual. I received a letter this morning from a viewer named Andy Lewis, who is not going to be watching this week, he told me, because he just does not want to deal with what is a horrible reality of the status of these incidents in the United States. He put it as well as I could even attempt to, so I'm going to put up his letter. And what he said is, David, the reality is pretty clear to anyone who takes time to think about what happened. The horror played out this past weekend is an intersection of a society that has many problems that it refuses to deal with. What happens when you take religious extremism from a faith that has refused to reform itself in any substantive way, add in a culture that celebrates testosterone-coated gun ownership, and blend that with a nation that still allows gays and lesbians to be denied jobs and housing in many states? You get what happened in Orlando. This shouldn't shock anyone, and only a fool will claim their one token solution would have prevented our bloody Sunday from happening. Could not say it better myself, Lewis. Anyone who wants to point to guns or mental illness or activist judges or evil liberals or whatever the case may be, whatever your angle is, it's incredibly naive to think that there is a simple solution here. And I won't pretend to have it, although many will.
Yeah, well, what's the common thread there? It's that people value their ideas more than the lives of their fellow citizens.
And there's this reflexive instinct to, rather than really thinking through a problem in a concrete and sober and empirical way, of going to whatever you see as the problem. Ban Muslims, or just look at the gun element, or just distract and say it's mental illness, or say it's ISIS taking over America. Those aren't the solutions, and hopefully we'll be having some guests on to talk through what might be all-encompassing solutions. I do want to address the gun issue, okay? The Orlando nightclub shooter, Omar Mateen, legally purchased the guns that he had on him quite recently, even though he has been known to law enforcement for years, as federal officials confirmed. As I've said many times, the gun angle is not the only angle that matters here, but it is an angle that does matter. And law enforcement sources told ABC News that he had a .223 caliber AR type rifle, as well as a Glock handgun on him at the time of the shooting, which the ATF says he purchased legally. News of the purchases came as officials confirmed that he was interviewed 3 times by the FBI in the years leading up to this horrifying mass shooting, which is the biggest mass shooting in U.S. history. Such information would not show up on a background check because the cases were closed, and law enforcement sources confirmed that Mateen was on the FBI's radar, but not necessarily on a watch list anyway. And as we know, Lewis, even being on the watch list wouldn't have prevented him from obtaining weapons. ABC News consultant and former acting Homeland Security Undersecretary John Cohen said, being on the watch list is not in itself disqualifying under law. Cell phone camera video footage filmed by civilians outside the Pulse nightclub where this took place reported, allowed us to hear 20 shots fired in rapid succession in a 9-second stretch. This high rate of fire also suggests the shooter had what is called a high-capacity magazine, which can hold more than 10 or 15 rounds. These have been used by many mass shooters. The shooters in the San Bernardino attacks, which led to 14 people dying, had these magazines that held 30 rounds each. And in 2012, we saw a mass shooting that used magazines that held over 10 rounds. So again, Lewis, people say the laws won't matter. The laws do make a difference around guns. It is absolutely true that it is possible to get one of these high-capacity magazines, even if you make them against the law. Changing a law doesn't prevent someone from doing something. But there's no doubt that if you make illegal the manufacture of such magazines, fewer of them will be in the system available for purchase, both legally and by virtue of that in the black market, and thus it wouldn't be impossible for a shooter to get one of them, but it would be more difficult because there are fewer of them around, and then he would not have been able to fire as many rounds in this short period of time, and more than likely, fewer people would have been killed. These are mathematical realities, and when people say, hey, listen, people who want to do a shooting are going to break the law. You can't do anything by passing a law. I don't think you really understand the point of passing laws.
Yeah. If no law really prevents anyone from doing anything, right? It's like we talked about before, it's a deterrent. And there's no doubt that there are any number of common sense laws we could have applied here that would have either prevented this or made it much more difficult for this to happen.
And I agree.
The amount of people killed.
That alone is not the solution. I am not one of these people who says the only thing we need to do is change gun laws. There's no doubt about it. But too many people online are saying that the gun laws don't matter. It's important to understand the distinction. Laws aren't created to prevent crime in the sense that a law being written doesn't physically prevent someone from committing a crime. But the point is, number one, you establish a framework for punishment for those who break a law. And number two, you want to make some people, not all, some people will think twice about committing a crime if a law is in place because of, number one, its deterrent effect. And in the case of if you make it illegal to manufacture these magazines, more than likely the manufacturers are not going to make them. And that will trickle down. Lots of stuff doesn't trickle down, like tax cuts for the rich, but it will trickle down because there will be fewer of these available in the system, both on the legal and black market. So we need to understand this. The gun angle is not the sole solution, but immediately you see people saying, we can't even consider doing anything on the gun front because it wouldn't make a difference. You're living in a fantasy world if that's what you believe.
I can point to any number of countries where we can offer proof that gun control actually does help.
We are on Twitter. I'm on Twitter at dpacman. Lewis is on Twitter at Lewis Motamedy. We will take a break. Plenty more coming up today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Jay Gregerson. Jay, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. As you may know, this is a program that is funded directly by our audience through the membership program. We do an entire extra show called the Bonus Show for our paid subscribers. You can sample the great member benefits and sign up instantly at davidpakman.com/membership. Let me remind you, if you ever shop on Amazon.com, by going to davidpakman.com/Amazon before you shop, you can redirect about 7% of your purchase away from Amazon and to the David Pakman Show. It doesn't cost you any extra. There's no forms to fill out. You merely go to davidpakman.com/Amazon before shopping. I recommend bookmarking the link, but what do I know? A few interesting items, Lewis, purchased through our link over the last week. Downton Abbey DVDs. I cannot get into Downton Abbey, Lewis. I don't know what it is. I've seen a few parts of several episodes, and I try to stick with it. I really do like a variety of types of shows. I just can't do it. I just cannot get myself to care about the stories and the characters.
I haven't really watched any of it, maybe about 5 minutes. And if you're 5 minutes into X episode and X season, you can't possibly be into it because you have no idea what the hell is happening.
Yeah.
But do you find it to be too pretentious? What is it?
It's not a question of it being pretentious. It's just I'm not captivated by any aspect of it. The period element of it doesn't interest me. The storylines that at least I've seen within episodes don't interest me.
Not enough nudity?
I don't. What's that?
Nothing. I said not enough nudity.
It is a PBS show, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. I just am not. I'm not drawn into it. But clearly, some in our audience are, and for that, I say that's fantastic. To each their own. You know. Also, tons of Bernie Sanders gear still being purchased through our Amazon link. People apparently are not giving up on Bernie yet, or at least not in terms of the gear. I mean, everything from sweatshirts to T-shirts to stickers, et cetera, et cetera. Now it is true that the gear is probably significantly discounted at this point.
That is true, yes. But I hope that whatever happens, I want to see memes, pictures, quotes, bumper stickers, T-shirts. I want to see all the Bernie stuff sticking around for as long as possible. More Bernie, the better, regardless of the outcome of the election.
Right. Put the message out there that the movement is hugely important and has made a huge impact, which it has. Remember, davidpakman.com/Amazon. I will also mention that this week we are going to take your calls on Wednesday, June 15th. We are doing it Wednesday this week. 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time. We will be taking your phone calls. The number is 617-830-4750. We took more calls than ever last week, Lewis. Some advice for people who want to get in. I mean, I recommend certainly call at 1:15 p.m. Eastern. Set a little reminder in your calendar. But it seems like we get a ton of calls stacked up at the beginning. People get frustrated because it's busy. And then very quickly they stop calling altogether. So my suggestion would be maybe try at 1:20 or even 1:25. We took calls for nearly 15 minutes last week. We want to try to spread them out. Our system is not sophisticated enough yet to just put people in some kind of hold queue.
That is true. And even if it were, based on the number of calls I saw cycling through, because it tells me when someone is calling, even when someone is on, there's still a very good chance that we would not have got to everyone because of our time constraints.
Right. So the advice is, call often and call the right number, which is 617-830-4750, Wednesday, 1:15 p.m. Eastern U.S. time. That's 10:15 a.m. in the morning Pacific time. We will be taking your calls and took some great calls last week. Donald Trump has melted down completely at a recent rally. He hugged the flag and asked the audience to shout out suggestions for vice presidential picks. The truth stranger than fiction, Lewis, and I assure you, this is not a fake or satirical story. Donald Trump, a total meltdown, really calling into question his mental stability. He was at a rally in Florida over the weekend. First, he asked people in the crowd just to shout out names for people that maybe should be his vice presidential running mate. And then he hugged the flag on the stage behind him. He took a break during the rally for audience participation. He said, "Who do you like for my running mate?" People yelled out Gingrich or Jeff Sessions. A couple people mentioned Condi Rice, former Secretary of State. She seemed to get the biggest applause, Lewis. Politico reported that Donald Trump seemed to be having a great time with this, and that the mention of Condi Rice garnered the most applause, Trump describing the entire exercise as fun. Fun is what he described it as. Yeah, in some way, Condi Rice and Trump would be the perfect match, right? Trump has lied about the fact that he was always against the Iraq War, not true. And Condi Rice claimed that the Iraq War was completely necessary for U.S. security. So in a way, it's like a perfect fit, Trump and Condi Rice.
Yeah, and then he might pull in or he thinks he'll pull in some of the black vote if he's got to. And maybe pull some voters away from Hillary who think that she's vile, but like the idea of having a woman in the administration in that way. But is that going to happen? I don't think so.
And then, of course, after taking these suggestions, Donald Trump turning around and hugging a flag. I wish I had more commentary on this. It crossed my mind. Maybe he was just wiping his face off on it, the way George Bush once did to that producer on the Dave Letterman show. There's this video of George W. Bush was on the Letterman show, and some kind of producer comes over to talk to Dave Letterman during a break, and George W. Bush just grabs her sweater and cleans his glasses with it. And it crossed my mind that would be an explanation. Maybe Trump had a greasy face and decided to wipe his face on the flag, which would be hugely disrespectful. But this is very, very erratic behavior from Trump, isn't it?
I don't know. It sounded like he really was having a good time. And he should have just draped himself in the flag. That's what he should do at every rally, really. I want to see him pander and grovel in the most hilarious ways possible.
The English language, I'm starting to wonder whether the English language even has the capacity to capture the absurdity that is Trump, or we're starting to be limited by our language and even describing how insane this all is. And if you're in the camp of believing that this was a joke to help Hillary Clinton all along, you've got a lot of evidence supporting that at this point. I mean, the guy is hugging flags on stage. This is erratic, bogus behavior.
Well, Donald Trump had really better get something good out of this deal because he won't be able to be VP. He won't be in the administration. What could she have possibly offered him to hand her the election? I can't imagine.
Trump's been friends with her for a very long time. I don't know. Maybe she didn't have to offer anything.
But no matter what the offer from Hillary Clinton, if I were in Donald Trump's position, there is no way I would dedicate this much time, effort, and money and get nothing back. I mean, I suppose there's the publicity of everything and the Trump brand name, which has actually suffered because of this.
Hotel bookings down. It's all been pretty bad. Maybe it started off as a goof and then it just became real.
Maybe it started as a goof and a PR stunt, and he realized, hey, I've actually got a shot.
Mitt Romney has affirmed again that he will not be supporting presumptive Republican nominee Donald Trump for president this year. He cited Trump's racist views and statements as a reason why. It's somewhat ironic since Mitt Romney is part of a religion, the Mormon Church, which until 1978 didn't even allow black people to be in the church's lay priesthood. But okay, let's ignore that for now. The church has made progress since then, and presumably Mitt Romney agrees with those changes. Romney has finally pointed out, I guess, a sort of trickle-down theory that does really happen. We know trickle-down economics is totally debunked and invalid. Giving rich people tax cuts does not lead to that money trickling down to the middle and lower classes. But now Mitt Romney has warned that presidents set an example, and that Donald Trump could bring what Romney is calling trickle-down racism, trickle-down bigotry, trickle-down misogyny. Here is the interview with Mitt Romney. I have to tell you, Lewis, Romney's making a lot of sense these days.
Well, I don't think there's anything I'm looking for from Mr. Trump to give him my support. He's demonstrated who he is, and I've decided that a person of that nature should not be the one who, if you will, becomes the example for coming generations or the example of America to the world. Look, I don't want to see trickle-down racism. I don't want to see a president of the United States saying things which change the character of the generations of Americans that are following. Presidents have an impact on the nature of our nation. And trickle-down racism, trickle-down bigotry, trickle-down misogyny, all these things are extraordinarily dangerous to the heart and character of America. And so I'm not looking for Mr. Trump to change a policy that more aligns with my own. This is not a matter of just policy. It's more a matter of character and integrity.
You think he's a racist?
Oh, I think his comments time and again appeal to the racist tendency that exists in some people, and I think that's very dangerous.
Part of this could just be personal, right? Romney thinking, hey, if I couldn't win in 2012, if I couldn't be president, then Trump definitely shouldn't win. Maybe also regretting he had to run against Obama doing a re-election campaign, whereas Donald Trump now gets to run against Hillary Clinton, who is very, very unpopular in terms of favorability. Romney must be regretting to some degree not jumping into this primary.
Well, hard to say. You have to really evaluate your life, and maybe just spending time with family was more important, and maybe it still is. He's right. And this is probably the most brilliant thing I've ever heard Mitt Romney say.
Mitt Romney seems completely reasonable. I mean, compared to what we saw this time around in the Republican primary and now with Donald Trump on a day-to-day basis. I mean, ban Muslims. Megyn Kelly was bleeding out of her you-know-what, referring to her vagina. We've got to get this judge off because he's Mexican. He couldn't possibly be impartial. Mitt Romney sounds like the moderate voice of reason, and that's horrifying. That is truly horrifying.
Yeah, and it's funny mentioning the Mormon thing. I mean, they think that being black is a curse,
right?
But yes, he does sound very level-headed.
The important thing is, the longer that there's a discussion of whether Trump is racist in the media, even if lots of his supporters think he's not racist, that has to be a bad thing for Trump, right?
Well, yeah, it's bad. I guess we'll see.
Donald Trump has responded, saying he's actually the least racist person that you have ever met. He also criticized Mitt Romney for losing to Barack Obama in 2012, and he's called Mitt Romney a loser many, many times. We have our voicemail today is actually from the Eggman, and it's about Mitt Romney, and it really is going to sum up the entirety of the Mitt Romney placement within this thing. And things are completely in bizarro world when you hear Mitt Romney and you say, this guy really makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's someone that I would become much more comfortable seeing as the president than the guy who's actually the Republican nominee. He seems sober. He seems balanced. He doesn't seem erratic. And I mean, this is the guy who strapped a dog to the roof of his car, causing it to have violent diarrhea during an entire family road trip, right? The guy strapping the dog to the roof of his car is the guy I would want being the president when I think of him versus Trump.
Yes, and Trump has an ego. He's a very proud man. He has to be very careful. He has to win this now.
Yeah.
Because if he loses, well, then Mitt Romney can call Trump a loser.
Give us a like on Facebook, facebook.com/David Pakman Show. We'll be back right after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Remember that story about Saudi Arabia being involved in a UN Human Rights Committee, which made absolutely no sense? Saudi Arabia, one of the main places where we lack human rights, where we have huge problems around human rights, having any say in the supervision of the world when it comes to human rights. As if it couldn't get even more absurd, it has now been revealed that Ban Ki-moon, UN from the United Nations, removed Saudi Arabia from a blacklist of child killers due to a financial threat from them to defund a United Nations program. Many are calling this extortion, although I don't know that it meets the legal definition of extortion. Certainly the spirit of it is extortive. The UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon didn't name the specific source of the threat, but news reports have indicated it came directly from the Saudi government. So this is how it all worked. And this is just so insane in that it proves Saudi Arabia should be on that list. The UN in 2015 had a report called Children and Armed Conflict, and it listed the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen under parties that kill or maim children and parties that engage in attacks on schools and or hospitals. The report was based on the work of some UN researchers in Yemen. It attributed 60% of the 785 children killed and 1,168 injured to this bombing coalition, which again, Saudi Arabia led. The Saudi government made very loud objections, and Ban Ki-moon said on recently, it might have been just a few days ago, that he was revising the report to review jointly the cases and numbers cited in the text in order to reflect the highest standards of accuracy possible. That was a week ago, okay? On Thursday, late Thursday last week, he then revealed the real motivation for this revision. He said the report describes horrors no child should have to face. At the same time, I also had to face the very real prospect that millions of other children would suffer grievously if, as was suggested to me, countries would defund UN programs. Saudi Arabia is one of the UN's largest donors in the Middle East. They give hundreds of millions of dollars a year to UN food programs in Syria and Iraq, and to programs that would help children and prevent the killing of children. Ban Ki-moon said that the decision was one of the most painful and difficult decisions he has had to make. Now, what has Saudi Arabia said about this? Saudi ambassador to the UN, Abdallah al-Moalimi, I believe is the right pronunciation, he held a press conference and said, "We didn't use threats, but such listing will obviously have an impact on our relations with the UN." And then going on to say, this is completely hilarious, "It is not in our style. It is not in our genes. It is not in our culture to use threats and intimidation." Hard to get through that without laughing. This is a country with a culture, a regime, and a specific sect of the Muslim faith which are built upon us versus them conflict and violence and intimidation and threats. Look at what happens when you say you're thinking of leaving the faith if you want to see threats. And they say it's not in their style to use threats and intimidation. Now, here is the horrific and depraved irony of this. Saudi Arabia was so desperate to be removed from a list of child killers that they threatened to stop funding programs that protect children, which, if withheld by Saudi Arabia, could lead to the death of more children, which would confirm that they deserve to be on the list, which they are using threats to be removed from. I mean, the absurdity of this is insane.
Mm-hmm. When it comes to national relations, I suppose Saudi Arabia is usually right when they say, we don't really issue threats. I mean, maybe they're talking about violence, but it's all money, right? It's always money, and they use money to influence anything and everything. I mean, look at our allegiance with them.
Well, let's not pretend Saudi Arabia is the only one using the threat of withheld funds for the UN, right? The U.S. has often threatened to pull funding when the UN acts in a way the U.S. doesn't like. Not extortion per se, as I said, but very clear that Saudi Arabia should absolutely be on the list. Longtime Republican donor and 2009 California Republican gubernatorial candidate Meg Whitman is maybe most well known as the CEO of eBay from 1998 to 2008. She ultimately lost her campaign in California to Governor Jerry Brown, but she is a very wealthy and powerful Republican donor. She has now likened Donald Trump to the fascist leaders Adolf Hitler and Mussolini. When Democrats compare a Republican candidate to Hitler, that's one thing. When fellow Republicans are doing it to their nominee, you know something unique is going on, Lewis. Whitman made the comment Friday at a conference hosted by previous Republican nominee Mitt Romney. She challenged Paul Ryan on his endorsement of Trump. And two participants who were there said off the record that Whitman's language was indeed that she was likening Donald Trump to Hitler and Mussolini. So either she thinks Trump is really, really bad, or she's really, really jealous of him because he's figured out a way to turn some level of business success, although it's certainly more questionable with Trump than it is with Meg Whitman, into political success, at least so far. She did make the comment privately, though, and it was leaked. So at least it seems more like this is genuinely what she thinks. It seems that at least some Republicans see Trump as similar to Hitler or Mussolini. To the extent that that makes sense, I'm not really sure, but it's stunning that even they are saying this.
Not so stunning to me. It's kind of true when you think about how Hitler operated. I mean, rallying people around their fears and prejudices.
Authoritarian disguised as populism.
Right. That's what's happening. And so I'm not going to say Trump is Hitler, but there are some similarities.
I tend not to buy into the entire, people I don't like are Hitler type of thing. And the real question I have is with the specifics of what's going on. You have Mitt Romney saying he is not going to support Trump. Trump is racist. You have Meg Whitman at a big Republican event saying that Trump is like Hitler. What's the point of it unless they're going to have some alternative? I refuse to believe that Romney and Whitman and so many prominent Republicans are publicly stating they will not be supporting Trump without any plan for what to do, because there is no way that they are okay with Hillary Clinton being the next president of the United States. So there has to be some end game here other than just saying don't support Trump, because that's ultimately only going to help Hillary Clinton. And it is so difficult to imagine that's what they're okay with.
Well, I don't know. Maybe you just feel that you sit this one out and you wait till the midterms and you do what you can there, and you set your sights on the future. What else are they going to do? I mean, no third-party candidate is really going to that's not going to be a thing.
It does seem like a catch-22. If you put in a third-party candidate, it's likely mostly to help Trump. The only possibility is some kind of coup at the Republican National Convention. I really don't know. I'm sort of feeling around in the dark because what is the end game for these Republicans who are being so critical of Donald Trump? We will take a break, a couple more stories, and a really great voicemail coming up.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
A major blow has been dealt to gun permissiveness in the United States via the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which ruled late last week that the Second Amendment does not protect the right of ordinary citizens to carry concealed firearms. This was a 52-page opinion from Judge William Fletcher, who went all the way back to the year 1299 and in sort of justifying why the Second Amendment does not guarantee the right to concealed carry firearms. And this 7-4 ruling, which was upheld by California, by the Ninth Circuit Court affecting California, says that you have to show good cause in order to participate, to be approved for concealed carry, and that requiring that one show good cause is not any kind of unconstitutional restriction. Now, how do you define good cause for concealed carry? It's defined by the policies outlined by each sheriff in their respective jurisdiction. The ruling also explicitly did not address the issue of open carry in public. So on the one hand, Lewis, this is hugely significant because it shows, hey, you know what? You can have a Second Amendment, but that doesn't mean you can't pass any restrictions. There are so many people who say, hey, you know what? Any restriction whatsoever on which guns people can have or in what circumstances or the specifics is some kind of infringement on the Second Amendment. And this is yet another example at the Ninth Circuit Court level, although it may be appealed to the Supreme Court ultimately, that no, you can establish some framework of restrictions around guns without violating the Second Amendment. On the other hand, we have this insane patchwork of different laws in different states and an insane number of guns in circulation and who knows what people are doing, that practically speaking, I don't know how much this will really do to people who shouldn't be carrying concealed guns.
Yes, don't we just need to rewrite the Second Amendment? I mean, we don't need to get rid of it. It needs to be rewritten. It's just not clear enough. And I know we have so much legal precedent to look at when we're talking about this. Like you said, it's a mess. But maybe we can just do something really simple and rewrite the Second Amendment. And I don't know, maybe that will help a little bit.
Yeah, good luck. I mean, it's a document that is a religious sacred text to some people. And by the way,
the Old Testament was the sacred text.
Yeah.
And then it got rewritten, right?
Into the Constitution?
Well, I don't know, maybe according to some people.
No, but you make a good point, which is the New Testament in many ways has made obsolete the Old Testament. So at least conceptually, even sacred texts can be rewritten or improvised or new versions created. Some gun nuts saying this is effectively a ban on the Second Amendment period. Of course, showing good cause is not a ban on guns whatsoever. I've talked about the ridiculous hypocrisy and obsession with breasts in the United States. We saw this front and center back in 2004 during the Super Bowl halftime show when part of one of Janet Jackson's breasts were visible for a few seconds on national television. And we had to, think of the children and figuring out what everyone's punishment should have been. And apparently from age 0 to 3, it's fine for kids to see breasts all the time since they're breastfeeding. From age 3 to 17, it's no longer okay. But then at age 17, when you can go to a rated R movie by yourself, it's okay to see breasts again. It no longer will ruin your life. And we have a story that really exposes the absurdity of this from Arlington, Virginia, where a mother is saying that her daughter's male swim instructor should be covering his chest during lessons because he has what the woman describes as breasts, and they sometimes come in contact with the daughter during swim lessons. Here's a note from the mom sent into the, I believe, the Parks and Rec department. Hello, Crystal. I took my daughter to this class yesterday. Unfortunately, the male instructor's breasts were flopping on the water, and we felt extremely uncomfortable with her getting into the water skin to skin and in such close proximity to his intimate space. When I mentioned this to the Parks and Rec representative, she told me that other parents had also complained that he was asked to put on a shirt but refused. To be in such close and intimate proximity to this man's bare chest, breasts, and public chest hair is unfathomable, and I cannot believe it is tolerated. I'd like to switch my daughter's class to an instructor who is more appropriate and doesn't make us feel uncomfortable. I mostly feel bad for the daughter for having to deal with this mom, but that's not really the issue here. There is some consistency here. If you believe that breasts should be covered, which I don't really care about, there is a sort of double standard in our media guidelines, which say women's chests must be covered when they are post-pubescent at minimum. But men can have shirts off no matter how big their so-called man boobs can be. They may be suffering from male gynecomastia. And you can have men with the equivalent of larger breasts than many women have, and they can walk around with no shirt on, but the women have to be covered. And it really has never made sense to me. Now, some places, New York, for example, has a law where anybody can walk around topless. Now, it's not really an issue. Every once in a while, you'll have a topless protest involving women. Of course, they're doing nothing against the law because it's legal. Nobody gets arrested for it, whatever. But there is a huge double standard with respect to this. Now, the solution for me is not that men with man boobs have to cover themselves. It's that we should all stop making a big deal out of breasts, shouldn't we?
Yeah. We don't need to repress and conceal and do even more of that. One thing I want to point out that you could probably take that little note and replace every instance of the word us with me, and it would probably be more accurate.
Right.
But yes, there are places in this country where women are allowed to be topless at all times. Isn't New York one of them?
Yeah.
New York, Austin is one of them, which you wouldn't expect from Texas, I know. But it happens, and nobody's lives are ruined because of it.
And I'm sort of joking that I like the consistency of what this woman is saying. The woman seems out of her mind. She has then gone on to alert the media. She's trying to make a huge deal out of this. But this should at least expose the absurdity of this entire thing. Covering the breasts, whether it's male or female, No kids' lives are being ruined by this. People are angry. Some conservatives are angry. President Obama hasn't done enough about nudity and profanity on television. I'm glad he hasn't done much about it because there are far bigger fish to fry. We have a voicemail number. It's 219-2-DAVID-P. The Eggman calling in with exactly what I'm thinking about Mitt Romney's reappearance into the 2016 Republican primary discussion.
Pac-Man, listening to Mitt Romney put down Donald Trump and give his opinions on Trump's policy and opinions. And Mitt Romney sounds so logical and smart and caring and sensitive and open to women's subjects. My God, Donald Trump is making Mitt Romney seem like a great Republican candidate. Oh, we're in trouble, brother. I miss Guatam. Have a good weekend, little brother. Shalom.
All right, yeah, so the Eggman is absolutely spot on. I mean, like I said, Mitt Romney seems very, very reasonable now that Donald Trump is the presumptive Republican nominee. On the bonus show today, the United States has approved flights to Cuba. There is a Japanese naked restaurant which is banning overweight people, and Qatar has convicted some victims of rape. I know that doesn't make any sense if you have any semblance of logic and critical thinking in your mind. We also have, what else, Lewis? What do we have? Something?
Oh, I was just going to say it's one victim, at least in this case, this story.
Okay. It said victims. So that, yeah. Okay. Call in this Wednesday, 1:15 p.m. Eastern Time. We will be taking your calls at 617-830-4750. 1:15 p.m. Eastern is the time. All topics, all questions. It is all on the table. And I look forward to speaking to you on the bonus show. Make sure to sign up at davidpakman.com/membership. You don't want to miss the bonus show. Very few people do. I've never met anyone who wants to miss it anymore.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.